My name is Harry Colton. I've always been a man of the streets, born and raised in the gritty heart of London. The kind of place where the smoke from chimneys never quite clears and the echoes of footsteps in the alleyways are constant. You learn quickly here that the world doesn't care much about you. If you're not born with silver in your mouth, you've got two choices. Work yourself to death or gamble everything you've got for a chance at a better life. I was 25 when I first heard about the underground horse racing. It wasn't anything official, not like the big races in Ascot or Epsom. No, this was the kind of race that took place in the shadows, in places you wouldn't want to walk alone at night. A friend of mine, Billy, a man whose name was always whispered, told me about it. He'd been in the game 4 years, or so he claimed. He said it wasn't just about the money. It was about power, the kind of power that could change your life overnight. Billy wasn't much to look at, just a scrappy man with a face full of scars and eyes that never seemed to stop looking over his shoulder. "Harry," he said one evening before we sat in the back of a rundown tavern, "there's money to be made if you're willing to get your hands dirty. But you gotta be smart. This isn't just about betting on horses. This is about controlling the game." His words hung in the air like smoke, thick with temptation. I didn't think twice. I was tired of scraping by, tired of seeing my father's tired face, his calloused hands, and his constant sighs about how little we had. Tired of watching the rich pass us by as if we didn't matter. So I took the bait. Billy introduced me to the world of underground betting. The first race I saw wasn't anything like the ones they show at the Grand Tracks. It was in a dirty, dimly lit warehouse, with men huddled in corners, eyes darting around nervously, whispering about odds and outcomes. There were no grandstands, no cheering crowds, just the roar of a few men who were hoping to make it big or, at the very least, hoping to stay afloat. The horses were different, too sleek, powerful beasts, but some looked a bit too thin, as if they had been overworked and underfed. The stakes were higher here, not just in terms of money, but in terms of reputation. The men placing baits weren't the kind of people you want to owe money to. I didn't have much money to start with, but Billy was kind enough to offer me a loan with interest, of course. My first bet was a long shot, a horse named King's Glory that no one really seemed to care much about, but it won. I don't think anyone was as surprised as I was. The feeling of victory was intoxicating more than the money. It was the realization that for once in my life, I was in control. After that first win, everything changed. Suddenly, I wasn't just another poor man on the streets of London. I was a gambler, a player in a game where the stakes were life and death. Every race became more than just a bet, it became a chance to escape. The money, the power, the rush, it was all so much more than I had ever imagined, but the deeper I went, the more I realized that the world I'd stepped into wasn't as simple as it seemed. Billy kept telling me to be careful. "You don't know who you're dealing with in these races," he'd warn, his voice low, his eyes scanning the room. "Some of these men have connections with people you don't want to cross. This isn't just about horses and odds, it's about loyalty. And once you're in, you can't back out." But I didn't listen. The allure of the money was too strong. I was hungry for more wins, more respect, more of the life I had always dreamed of. I started making bigger baits, and it didn't take long for me to get noticed by Tommy Black, a name that struck fear into the hearts of most people in the underground world. Tommy was the one who controlled most of the betting, both legal and illegal. He had his hands in everything, from horse racing to street fights to gambling rackets. The first time I met Tommy, I thought I was going to lose my nerve. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a cold smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His voice was smooth, almost charming, but there was a harsh edge to it, a warning I wasn't quite ready to hear. "I've seen you, Harry," he said, tapping his cigar against the side of his chair. "You're good at picking winners. But you need to understand something. This is a game where you either win big, or you end up buried. There's no middle ground." I nodded, trying to keep my composure, but inside I felt a flicker of fear. That fear didn't last long, though. With Tommy's endorsement, I moved deeper into the world of high-stakes gambling. I started placing huge baits, betting on horses that were barely known, betting on outcomes that seemed too good to be true. And sometimes they were, but other times they weren't. I won. And with every win, I felt more untouchable, more in control. But as I got deeper into the game, I started to notice the darker side of things. People I had known for years were disappearing. Others were showing up with bruises, and the stakes were rising. The money was good, but the danger was real. And there was no way out once you were in, but I couldn't stop. The money was too easy, the power too seductive, and so I kept going, putting my fate in the hands of horses, men like Tommy, and the ever-present risk that one day I would lose everything. As I got deeper into the underground world of horse racing, I began to realize that the stakes were no longer just about money. This wasn't just a game, it was a dangerous game of survival, one where lives were at risk, and loyalty meant everything. Tommy Black, the man who had given me my start in this world, wasn't just a gambler. He was a kingpin in the underground scene, controlling the baits, the horses, and even the men who worked for him. Everything ran through him, and anyone who crossed him, no matter who they were, didn't walk away unharmed. I remember the first time I saw Tommy's true power. I was at one of his private events, a race that was far from legal. The horses weren't the real stars. It was the baits, the men, and the backroom deals that mattered. Tommy walked in, his presence filling the room, and everyone immediately knew who was in charge. The air was thick with tension and the scent of cigar smoke. People whispered about their baits, made deals in hushed voices, but all eyes were on him. That night, something happened that changed everything for me. I had placed a sizable bet on a horse named Black Fury, a horse I had been told was unbeatable. But as the race started, I noticed something odd. Black Fury wasn't running as fast as he should have been. There was a slowdown, a hesitation in his stride. I glanced over at Tommy, who was watching intently. His expression remained calm, but I could see the flicker of something in his eyes, something dark. As the race progressed, it became clear to me that Black Fury was intentionally losing. The jockey's movements were off, the horse was holding back. At that moment, the realization hit me like a blow to the chest. This wasn't about racing anymore, it was about control. The horses were pawns, the bettors were pawns, and Tommy was the puppet master. He controlled everything, and no one dared question him. The race ended, and Black Fury lost. The baits were settled quickly, but the air was thick with anger and confusion. I could see it in the faces of the men who had bet large amounts on the horse. They were furious, and they knew that Tommy had rigged the race, but they didn't dare speak up. Instead, they paid their debts and walked away in silence, their eyes downcast. I realized that Tommy's grip on this world went deeper than I could have imagined. The lives of the men around me didn't matter, not if they lost their money, not if they lost their lives. The game was controlled by those with the power to make the rules, and Tommy had the power. After that night, I started to see things differently. The world of underground horse racing wasn't just a way to make money, it was a game of survival. Tommy wasn't just a man with connections. He was a man who owned everything, including the lives of the people who played in his world. I wanted out. The more I saw, the more disgusted I became. But I wasn't in a position to walk away, not yet. Tommy made it clear that I was in deep. One evening, he pulled me aside after a particularly high-stakes race, his eyes cold as ice. "You're good, Harry, real good," he said, flicking the ash off his cigar. "But you need to understand something. Once you're in, there's no getting out." I nodded, not fully understanding the weight of his words at the time. But I was beginning to realize the truth. I wasn't just a spectator anymore. I was part of the machine, a cog in the system that Tommy had built. And then came the real test. A few weeks later, Tommy called me into his office. It was a dark, smoky room, dimly lit by a single hanging lamp. On the table were stacks of cash, envelopes filled with money, and several contracts. Tommy leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together, as if waiting for something. "I need you to handle something from me," he said quietly. "A little problem I need taking care of." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of problem?" "A man," Tommy said, his voice suddenly cold. "Someone who's been trying to mess with my races. He needs to be taught a lesson." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't just about horses anymore. This was about power, the power to destroy anyone who got in Tommy's way. "I want you to do it," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "I've given you a chance, Harry. You're part of the family now. But if you refuse, there's no turning back." I knew what that meant. Tommy didn't just control the races, he controlled everything. People who crossed him didn't disappear from the world. They disappeared from life. I was being offered a choice, either prove my loyalty or become a target. I was in too deep to turn back. There was no escape. It didn't take long before the weight of Tommy's request started to settle in. The job was simple enough: take care of him. But I had no idea what that meant until the day I walked into Tommy's office. I'd been part of the world long enough now to understand what that phrase meant. There were no second chances, no room for hesitation. If someone was messing with Tommy's money or power, they had to be eliminated, and I was the one who would have to do it. Tommy's office was just as it always was, dimly lit, filled with smoke from his ever-present cigar. He sat behind his desk, looking at me with a cold, calculating gaze. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the surface of the desk, a subtle sign of impatience. "I've set it up," he said, not looking at me. "You'll meet him tonight at the docks. It'll be easy. You'll make sure he doesn't talk, doesn't give us any more trouble." My stomach turned. I'd been involved in shady dealings before, but this felt different. This felt like crossing a line that there was no coming back from. "Do it, and you'll get your cut. If you don't, we'll have a problem," Tommy said casually, but there was an edge to his voice that made my skin crawl. "And don't mess it up. I'm giving you a chance, Harry, but remember you're just as expendable as the next guy if you fail me." I nodded, my throat dry. I wasn't sure if I was nodding out of fear or because I was too deep into this world to back out now. The fear was there, but something else stirred within me, a sense of loyalty, however misplaced, and the belief that I could do it, that I had to prove myself. That night, I found myself standing at the docks, the air thick with fog, my breath coming out in short, nervous bursts. The sound of the water slapping against the wood was the only noise, and it felt like the world was holding its breath. I knew that this was it, that my life would be irrevocably changed by what was about to happen. The man I was supposed to meet was George, a former associate of Tommy's who had somehow crossed him. George was supposed to be loyal, but loyalty in Tommy's world meant nothing if you couldn't make him money. So now, George was a liability, and I had been chosen to take him out. He arrived at the docks, looking just as nervous as I felt. I could see the desperation in his eyes as he approached. He knew what was coming. The moment I pulled the gun out, there was no more talking, no more room for negotiation. His face paled, and he started begging, but I wasn't listening. His words were just noise. I could hear Tommy's voice in my head, urging me on. "No mercy. He's dead the moment you lay eyes on him. Don't hesitate." I didn't hesitate. I did what I had been trained to do, what Tommy had taught me to do. And just like that, George was gone. The shot rang out, loud and final. For a moment, the world was still. The fog thickened around us, and I stood there, looking at George's lifeless body, my heart pounding in my chest. The reality of what I had done hit me like a freight train. I remember the drive back to Tommy's place. The adrenaline still coursed through my veins, but there was something else, something darker, a weight that I hadn't expected to feel. Tommy was waiting for me in his office, sitting behind his desk as usual, looking unfazed. He didn't even bother to congratulate me or acknowledge the task I had just completed. All he said was, "Good job, Harry, now, get ready for the next one." It was then that I realized just how deep I had sunk. I was no longer just a spectator, a gambler placing baits on horses. I was a part of this machine, now a cog in the wheel of a criminal empire that thrived on violence, betrayal, and manipulation. But even as I stood there, knowing that I was trapped, something inside me clicked. This was my life now, and there was no going back. I could feel the weight of George's death pressing on me. It was in my chest, in my throat, choking me, but I couldn't let it show. Not here, not in front of Tommy. The next few weeks passed in a blur. The world around me started to blur as well. The faces of the men I worked with, the baits, the races, it all became one big mess. I couldn't tell where the line between the gambler and the criminal ended anymore. Every time I made a bet, every time I placed a wager on a horse, I knew I was gambling with more than just money. I was gambling with my soul. And it wasn't just the violence and the death that weighed on me. It was the realization that Tommy had turned me into someone I barely recognized. I wasn't the same guy who had walked into that tavern years ago. I had crossed too many lines, and I knew that I would never be able to go back. Tommy's power grew. More people came into the fold, more deals were made, and soon enough, the police were sniffing around. There were whispers that something was wrong, that the network was too powerful. And yet, it felt like no matter what happened, Tommy was always one step ahead. But there were cracks forming. Enemies were starting to show up, people who had been left behind in Tommy's wake. And that's when I realized that the higher you go, the harder you fall. Tommy had enemies, too, and he wasn't as untouchable as he liked to think. I started to wonder if I was next. The weight of George's death hadn't left me. It lingered in every corner of my mind, a constant reminder of the man I had become. I tried to push it down, focus on the next race, the next deal, but it was always there, haunting me, reminding me that once you cross a line, there's no turning back. Tommy's world was growing more dangerous by the day. Every time I walked into his office, I could feel the tension in the air. His empire was under threat, and the people around him were starting to turn. The whispers of betrayal were everywhere. People had started to question his leadership, and those who had served him loyally were now growing restless. Tommy's power, his cold grip on everything, was starting to crack. One night, as I sat in a dimly lit room, the door creaked open, and Billy, the man who had first brought me into this world, stepped inside. His face was pale, his eyes filled with worrying. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "Tommy's losing control. There are people talking about taking him down, and they're coming for you next." I froze, my heart racing. "What do you mean? Coming for me?" Billy sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Tommy's getting sloppy. He's made enemies, and they know you're close to him. They'll come after you if they think you're a liability." I knew it was true. My name was tied to Tommy's empire, to the money, to the blood. If he fell, so would I. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You leave," Billy said, his eyes serious. "Get out while you still can. I'll cover for you." But I knew it wasn't that simple. Leaving wasn't an option anymore. I was too deep in, too entangled in the web Tommy had woven. And I had my own blood on my hands now. I couldn't escape the life I had chosen. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts swirled in circles. Every move I had made, every decision, every race I had bet on, leading me to this moment. And then, a thought that had been lingering in the back of my mind surfaced. Was this the end? The next few days were a blur. Tensions were at an all-time high. Tommy's paranoia was growing, and it wasn't just the outside threats he feared anymore. He was afraid of the people closest to him. I sat in Tommy's office one afternoon, waiting for him to finish a phone call. I had made up my mind by then. I had to end this. I had to make a choice. Tommy hung up the phone and looked at me, his expression cold. "Harry," he said, his voice low, "I know what you're thinking. You want out. You want to walk away from all this." My throat tightened. Was it that obvious? "I know it's hard, but you've come too far," he continued, a sly grin spreading across his face. We're family. You don't leave family. I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. I had already made my choice. That night, I went to the docks where it all started. The fog had returned, thick and suffocating. I stood there, the cool air biting at my skin, thinking about the man I had been. How far had I fallen? I was supposed to meet Tommy there, but I wasn't sure if he knew what was coming. I had to make it right. I couldn't let the man who had turned me into this monster have the final say in my life. I needed to take control. When Tommy arrived, he was smiling, but the smile faded when he saw the gun in my hand. What are you doing, Harry? He asked, his voice low, the anger barely contained. I'm not your pawn anymore, Tommy, I said, my voice shaking, but I held my ground. You've used me for too long. It's over. He took a step forward, his hand moving toward his coat pocket. You think you can walk away from this, he hissed. But I wasn't going to let him control me anymore. The gun was steady in my hand, and before I could think, I fired. Tommy fell, his body crumpling to the ground, his eyes wide with shock. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at him, the reality of what I had just done sinking in. The world felt like it had stopped moving, and then I felt the weight of everything hit me at once. I had killed the man who had given me everything: money, power, freedom, and now I was alone. I stood there, shaking, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. But deep down, I knew it was over. I had done what I had to do, but there was no victory in it. I had taken the life of the man who made me, and now I had to live with the consequences. Tommy's empire would fall, and so would I. The life I had built would crumble beneath the weight of the decisions I'd made.